Hey everybody, as you can see here, I've updated the character creation scene, made it much more like the way I'd need it for my game that I would like to make. I'm actually using real skills, real genders and races and classes that I've set up for my game. Even though my game is, long in the works, it's not going to be done. I'm not even working on it actually, I'm just using it for this project. So I've made this more advanced so that when you come to the character creation screen, this is what you're set with. If you wanted to, in right here under character creation, we have the whole game data, and there's a lot more than there was last time. We still have the basic stuff, but underneath this, we've got listings for the genders, listing for the character classes. Um, Here we have 32 classes. Uh, it gets pretty in depth. We have 32 classes. Uh, 8 of them, these are the 8 base classes, and each base class can go into 3 different other classes. So there's a total of 32 classes, and each class has a proficiency value for all the available skills. And so, like, for a skill with the ID 28, it has a value of 1.2, which means that he'll get a 20% bonus to that skill, whether it's might or maybe a bonus like theft or something like that. So each one of the classes has proficiency, and that's their base. That's the default. So if you want to add classes or change classes, you do that here. If you want to change the proficiency of the various skills, you do that here as well. Same with the races. There are 4 races. Each one has proficiency as well. When the value is 0, I use that to mean you can't use it. So value is 1 means it's default. 0 means you can't use it. So if I wanted to say that, under the character classes, the mage can't use he can use a sword at 75%, but he can't use this weapon. I think that's an axe, maybe. He can't use an axe at all, so he wouldn't be able to equip one at all. So that's in the game data. That's just holding the defaults for everything. Under the character tab, we have our 4 characters. I'll close these. I've given them starting names. You can change that. You can change the starting gender. The gender ID 0 equals male, 1 equals female, and that is actually listed somewhere in here, maybe under classes. I listed a lot of the things that I've set up here. And actually changed this one. So basically, every skill can have different skill levels. I have to get to a certain proficiency with it, or to certain experience points with it. You can upgrade to expert, master, and grandmaster. So most of these have the IDs listed here, but it's also listed in this fancy lookup table. I create a function, a static function called getID. If you pass in the name of something, it will return the ID of it. This is just hard-coded. I need to add more things. I don't think I've added like gender in here. Oh, I did add gender. I did not add the skill levels though, the expert, novice, and whatnot. But that way, if you call lookup.getID knight, it will return 0, which is the ID of the knight. It makes it slightly easier than having to remember the ID of every single thing in the game. So okay, so this is the in-game version as well. This is not this is the defaults of where it's going to start. But once this is set, this will actually be the in-game stats of the player. So the race ID, knight, class and class ID, the level 1, 0 experience, 0 skill points. I still have to do hit point and magic point calculations. I haven't added that yet. I need to figure out the algorithm I'm going to use. But the rest are all there. Thumbnail position, of course, is where he'll be on the bottom. And then here we have the skills. This is going to hold whether or not they have the skill. 0 means none. They do not have the skill. 1 would mean they're a novice, etc. Points is how many skill points they have in that. In this game, every time they level up, they're going to be given a handful of skill points that they can assign to their various skills. And every time they use one, the requirement for the next level goes up by 1. So this will hold that. value, what they've selected there, and then the proficiency. Every time this changes, or really anytime anything changes, it will recompute the proficiency for all this stuff. So for instance, there could be an item, an amulet that they wear, and the amulet gives them, a 5 skill point bonus to the sword skill, and therefore the proficiency will have to change because maybe the proficiency goes up with every point. I'm not sure, but this gets recalculated, and the proficiency here gets used in the calculations for the attacks and defense and all that stuff. So there's going to be that skill for every character, and there's 4 characters, and then we have the scene stuff still, and that hasn't changed. Underneath this, we also have other classes and variables. We have our buttons, just all our buttons there. Those are all that, just text and UI elements. This create character is stuff that I use for the create character scene. These classes are only going to be used here. More of that, more of that. We start out with 50 bonus points. Users are able to customize their characters. They're all base 10, but they start out with 50 bonus points that they get to assign. There's a few things that happen. Let me just press play here. So it starts off by populating everything and selecting the things that are selected. The users do have to use up the bonus points, and they do have to choose 3 skills for the Start Your Journey button to activate. You can click between each of the characters. The skills that are available are based on what class you are. In each class, of course, they have those modifiers for the various things, including the stats. So a knight has apparently a 20% bonus to might and a 10% negative to charisma. Barbarian has a 10% might and stamina bonus and 90% of wisdom, though. So users can adjust that, and then also the races have their own benefits. So a half-orc knight is going to be quite strong. They get a 40% bonus there, but a huge drop to charisma. So these are the male and female don't do anything. They're just going to change the character model, which of course I don't have yet. And then you can choose the 3 skills. You can only choose 3. You can have to click one off to choose more than 3. So once we choose all 3, for all 3 characters, and once we add bonus points, all the bonus points, I think I'm going to add a debug where this just lets you continue without doing all this, because this is slightly tedious. Once you do that, you can start your journey. So trust me that it works. That part does work. Let's go look at the script real quick. So the lookup has 2 static functions. One, we already talked about, the get ID. The second one is compute proficiency. If you pass the game file, also your character ID, 0 through 3, and the skill name as a string. That way you don't have to remember the skill ID. This is where that get ID comes into play. Then it will return the proficiency of that character. So for instance, I might want to say, let's say the attack damage that I'm going to give to an enemy equals 30, right? And I have a proficiency in the weapon that that changes the attack damage. So attack damage will now equal attack damage times proficiency, which would be lookup.compute proficiency. Game, we'll pass game. I keep game as the variable that I use on every script. So game, and then let's say this character number 0, and we're going to call this sword. So now the attack damage will be equal to 30 times wherever the proficiency value is. If the proficiency is 1.2, then the attack damage will now be 36. If the proficiency is maybe 75%, then it will be 22.5. Is that right? 22.5, I think. So that's an easy way to use the proficiency. And this little script, once I have it, will add equipment modifiers, status modifiers, and skill modifiers as well. Like if you have a slow spell, you might have a different proficiency for speed. Maybe speed reduces, or a slow spell reduces your speed proficiency by 30%, as well as lowering your speed base, and etc. So that basically will give a return that function. It's pretty handy. So we have a lot more classes here. You can go through this if you wanna look at the details of it. They're all used in here for the most part. We have a bunch of functions. So the first, we've got the stat points. This is just returns the phrase of how many stat points. Because if it's 1, it's supposed to be bonus point. If it's not 1, it's bonus points. So that returns that. It's used right here when I want to change the stat points text to that. A whole bunch of these functions are simple. Create random name, that's from before. Eventually users will create their own game name and their own character names, but not quite yet. This starts the game. This selects our character. All it does is change the selected character variable and then updates the UI to match. All these functions are just updating the stats. It gives a value. These are the plus and minus buttons. It gives the value, does some checks on whether or not we can change the value, and whether it's with the minimum stat value and the maximum stat value, etc. And if it is, then it adjusts the bonus points and the stat itself for that character and updates the UI. So there's 7 of those, one for each of the things. Update class, if the selected character's class ID is not the same as new class. This was written, by the way, before I had the lookup get ID. If I had that, then I just would have passed the class name. I don't want to change it now. I might change it. I probably will change it. I'll probably change it, but not yet. I don't know when, at some point. And the same for the race, same for the gender. It simply changes it and then updates the UI. Updating the UI right here does all the calculations as well. So the first thing we do is for each character, we color the button on if it's the character that's selected, off if it's not. We do the color for the classes, color for the races, and color for the genders. Then we update the text. So right here, our might text is going to be our base might, that's the game character selected character's might, times lookup compute proficiency, pass the game along, pass the selected character ID and the word might, and you'll get whatever the proficiency is that, and so you get your might. I'm actually really happy with this code right here. I'm really happy with it. That's the stat points. We looked at that earlier. This is the skill buttons based on your class. So every class can have choose up to 3 of the skills from a pre-selected 8 that they can choose from. So that has to change. So inside this create character class, there's all these buttons that you can break it down if you really want to, but it basically gets the 8 available to that class and puts them onto those buttons. And then we check the start button. Checking the start button, it starts off with can start is false. If our bonus points are 0, it searches to make sure it searches through all the characters. That's the 4 right here. And then for each character, it searches through all their skills, and it makes sure that the skills equal 12. That means all 4 characters have 3 skills, and if it can start, then it turns that start button to be interactable. Otherwise, it's not interactable. When you choose a skill button, it finds the skill name based on the button ID. Now, this is again the create character class skill button, and then you get the class ID that's selected by the character. So you get the skill button for the class ID in button ID position 1 through or 0 through 7, and then the name of that. So you can break down the class for create character if you really want to, but it basically gets that. When you break it down, it should start making sense to you. And then we get this the ID of the skill based on the name. Just look at the get ID. And there's going to be I'm going to make another class that says lookup get name based on the type and the ID. Since IDs are shared, we can't just do ID. So we're going to have to do type such as race, then ID, and then that'll return the name. So you can look it up the opposite direction as well. And that'll be in the lookup file eventually. So next we check to see if the character's already selected, or if the button's already selected. If it is, we deselect it, and to deselect it we make levels, points, and proficiency back to 0 and turn the color to off. Otherwise, we make sure that we already have less than 3. If we have 3, then we won't select it. If we have less than 3, then we will select it. Change these to 1, add the proficiency to wherever the computed proficiency is, and update the UI. Remove skills, this is called every time you update the character class. It just resets the skills for that character. It's easier than other ways of doing things. And then of course these are just the public classes for the create character. So that's pretty much it. It's not pretty yet, but it works, and that's always exciting. So the next step, I'm going to make another video for the save and load stuff that I also did today.